Somehow, Alexander Lukashenko has gotten even more insane. Putin's Belarusian puppet has already been rambling about mobilizing his forces and getting ready for war, but now nukes are in play. Lukashenko and Putin are cooperating to bring something dark to NATO's backyard. It's Russia, it's Belarus, it's nuclear weapons. What could possibly go wrong? A lot, as it turns out, but we'll cover the drills first. On May 18th, Politico, along with many other outlets, reported that Russia and Belarus had launched joint drills to practice deploying tactical nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory. The drills felt like they came out of nowhere, as neither country had reported preparing for anything like this in the weeks and months prior. One day there was nothing planned. The next day, Belarus was working with Russia to train its troops on how to launch a nuclear weapon at an unspecified enemy. These aren't on-off drills either. According to the Belarusian Defense Ministry, the drills, which began on May 18th, are set to last several weeks and are likely to escalate in scale over time. In an official statement, the ministry remains somewhat vague about what it will be doing, stating, "The main focus of this event will be testing readiness to carry out combat missions from unprepared locations throughout the Republic of Belarus. The primary focus will be on practicing stealth, movement over significant distances, and conducting calculations for the use of forces and assets." But Belarus isn't fooling anybody with this sort of generic statement. It's training to launch tactical nukes, and that is a major concern, not only for its neighbor Ukraine, but for several countries that are under the NATO umbrella. News Sky reports the details, noting that the next few weeks will see Belarus launch similar drills covering multiple regions of the country, and that their main goal is threefold: test the military's readiness for movement of nuclear weapons, test their preparation for use, and perhaps most worryingly of all, test the methods used to ensure the secrecy of a nuclear weapon deployment should Belarus decide to go from drills to a full attack. The drills will apparently give both Belarus and Russia a better idea of how well tactical nuclear weapons can be transferred across long distances in Belarus, along with how many soldiers and what equipment will be needed to make such transfers possible. Belarus has already dedicated a lot of troops to the first stage of the exercise. News Sky reports that 1,500 soldiers are taking part, and they'll be using around 200 pieces of equipment, including aircraft. The one saving grace in all of this is that Russia currently maintains full control over the nuclear stockpiles being amassed in Belarus. But the danger is that drills like this could allow Belarus to operate independently, at least in the preparatory stages, to set up for a strike in the future. If we didn't already know it, then it's official now. Lukashenko has lost his mind. Once a lapdog to Putin, the Belarusian dictator could have at least claimed in the past that he was looking out for his people's best interest. He would have been lying, but he could have claimed it. But now Lukashenko has essentially handed the reins of control over to Putin, allowing his country to be turned into a complete puppet state, militarily speaking, as well as a staging ground for nuclear weapons launches. But why now? What has prompted Russia and Belarus to restart the nuclear saber rattling in a way we've never really seen before? The answer may lie in something that Ukraine did that has given Putin a major scare. This unexpected joint exercise seems to have been set up as quickly as possible after Ukraine conducted the largest ever drone attack that it's launched against Moscow and the surrounding regions. Russia claimed 3 civilian casualties in that strike. But for Ukraine, it was all about proving its aerial power and taking out as much military infrastructure in and around Moscow as possible. By the end of the weekend of strikes, Ukraine had launched around 1,300 drones, penetrating Russian air defenses around Moscow several times. Among the damaged facilities are plants responsible for manufacturing the electronics and microchips used in Russian missiles, the Moscow oil refinery, and an oil depot in Solnechnogorsk. Ukraine unleashed several drones during the attacks. They included the FP-1 drone made by Firepoint, which is already well known, along with the RS-1 BARS, which is a jet-powered drone designed to strike targets hundreds of kilometers away. The Guardian also reports that Ukraine used a drone that hadn't previously been revealed to the public, named the BARS SM Gladiator. That drone signifies the one thing that terrifies Putin more than anything: Ukraine is getting stronger in the deep strike aspect of the war. As Moscow burned, Putin and his cronies would have realized that there are no longer any truly safe places on Russian territory. Ukraine has grown too powerful. Its long-range weapons can not only reach Moscow, but they can also overcome the dense air defenses that Russia has packed into the region. Putin, this means that Ukraine is no longer a country that he can contain. The joint drills in Belarus started immediately after this round of strikes. Putin, using Lukashenko, is trying to send a message to Ukraine that he's willing to escalate. But this could still be a threat. After all, it's not as though Russia has only now started to rattle the nuclear saber. Thinly veiled threats about nuclear destruction have been a hallmark of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. though these threats have always been seen as intimidation tactics rather than genuine. That perspective has been borne out by over 40 years of fighting and no tactical nukes deployed. However, we also can't ignore the fact that Russia seems to be preparing itself for the possibility that it will launch nuclear weapons in the future. Back in November 2024, the Kremlin announced Putin had signed a new decree that altered Russia's formal policy on its use of nuclear weapons. A handful of changes were made via this decree, with the most important being that Russia could adopt a first-use policy if it felt the use of conventional weapons posed a threat to Russian sovereignty or territorial integrity. Russia could use every attack that Ukraine has launched into its territory so far to justify a nuclear strike under this adjusted nuclear policy. Could the attack on Moscow have been big enough to make Russia consider making first use a reality? Hopefully not. It's very possible that the joint drills in Belarus are intended to be yet more threats in response to Ukraine's Moscow strikes, albeit threats that are being made closer to Ukraine's territory than ever before. Or it could be so much more. There are a lot of things that make these latest drills more worrying than the standard nuclear threats that Putin is known to spout. Dangerous precedents are being set. A puppet president is handing yet more control over to his puppet master. And the reality is that all of this has been a long time in the making, and it could spell disaster, not just for Ukraine, but for NATO. These factors change everything. And by the way, this is the military show. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. Hit subscribe to ensure that you always stay ahead of the curve. Let's take a closer look at Belarus and its role in all of this. While these joint drills are making headlines not only because of the surprise factor of them being launched at all, but also because they're set to be far lengthier than normal. What shouldn't be a surprise is that Belarus is allowing these drills to happen. Putin has told Lukashenko to jump, and the lapdog's only question is, how high? The reality is that Russia has been setting up for something like this for a while. We saw that when Putin transferred some of Russia's Oreshnik hypersonic missiles to Belarus toward the end of 2025. Russia hasn't been shy about this deployment. Footage published by Russia's Defense Ministry on December 30th showcased Oreshnik mobile missile systems that had been deployed to the forests of Belarus, which in itself was a threat to Ukraine and NATO. The message was clear. Russia is moving nuclear-capable missiles that Ukraine says may be capable of traveling at speeds up to Mach 11. The move was just one of many that demonstrate how Belarus has allowed Russia to use it for its attacks against Ukraine. Belarus served as a staging ground for tens of thousands of Russian troops for the initial invasion of Ukraine, the Atlantic Council points out. Apart from the nuclear issues, Belarus has also been accused of hosting equipment that enables Russia's long-range drones to strike their targets. Plus, Russia is believed to have set up ammunition depots on Lukashenko's territory, which is yet more preparation that seems to indicate that Russia intends to use Belarus for something, be that another ground invasion or an attack that is far more sinister in the future. Belarus, for over 4 years now, has been one of the most important backers of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The nukes that are on its territory further this backing and can only be seen as something of a reward given to Lukashenko for being such a good lackey. Russia's nuclear threat as posed via Belarus was also much longer in the making than these most recent drills suggest. Way back in May 2023, Russia signed a deal with Belarus that formalized the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory. Russia claimed that the step was taken due to rising tensions with the West, and it came on the back of an announcement that the deal will be formalized, which Putin made the previous March. It wouldn't take long for nukes to start rolling into Belarus. The first delivery happened in June 2023, as confirmed by Lukashenko. Seemingly giddy at the prospect of hosting nukes, Lukashenko reportedly bragged that the warheads Belarus was receiving were 3 times as powerful as those that the US dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945. Relatively small in the grand scale of nuclear power in the 21st century, but more than enough to cause devastation in Ukraine or a NATO territory. That was the entire point, at least back in 2023. A message was being sent by Russia via Belarus. Lukashenko was allowing his country to be used as a staging ground. Initially, that involved acting as a route through which Russia could send troops for what was supposed to be a flash invasion of Ukraine. But when Ukraine didn't crumble as Putin expected, Belarus backed off from being a direct conduit into Ukraine for Russia's soldiers, likely due to fear over Ukraine retaliating with strikes. That same fear is likely what drove Lukashenko over the edge, to the point where he is now allowing Russia to use his country as a nuclear proxy. Fast forward to now, and joint nuclear drills are happening. Lukashenko is sending a message: mess with us and Uncle Putin might let us use nuclear weapons. And that is where all of this could go very, very wrong. As worrying as Russia's nuclear threats have been up until this point, there have always been a certain undercurrent to them, an assumption that Putin was never really serious because he knew that Russia launching a nuke would prompt a devastating response from NATO and its nuclear-capable members. Now a precedent is being set. Dangerous Russian nuclear weapons are being handed over to a puppet state that could act on Putin's behalf, or even independently, while giving Russia some shred of plausible deniability that it was involved in a strike that comes from Belarus. "We just armed them with nukes," Putin and his cronies could claim. "We had no idea Lukashenko was insane enough to use them." Belarus's president is being played for a fool as the Kremlin manipulates him into ceding yet more of his control to Putin. But before we get to that, let's look at the issue of precedent. It isn't as though stationing nuclear weapons in another country is a situation that is unique to Russia and Belarus. The US does the same thing, albeit with countries that have far more stable leadership structures than Belarus. According to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, the US has stationed nukes in 5 other countries, including Italy, Belgium, Germany, Turkey, and the Netherlands. It has never escaped Putin's notice that all of these nations are within striking distance of Russia. The US maintains that it has full operational control over these weapons, meaning that they aren't being launched unless the US says so. But what this means is that there was already some precedent for what Russia and Belarus are doing right now. Putin and Lukashenko can use that. If the US does it, why can't Russia? The difference, as Ukraine points out, is that the US isn't staging its nukes in countries that are ruled by crazy authoritarians. Russia is. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says, "By turning Belarus into a nuclear staging ground near NATO borders, the Kremlin is de facto legitimizing the proliferation of nuclear weapons worldwide and setting a dangerous precedent for other authoritarian regimes. Such actions must face unequivocal and resolute condemnation from all states that respect the nuclear non-proliferation regime." The ministry has called for more sanctions on both Russia and Belarus, along with a substantial increase in support for Ukraine in the wake of the announcement of the joint nuclear drills. A red line has been crossed, Ukraine says, and a response is needed to ensure that Russia knows that whatever it plans to use Belarus to do will get the appropriate response. The question now is how NATO will respond to all of this. The answer should be to deliver what Ukraine is asking for. Why? Because what's happening in Belarus right now is as much of a threat to NATO as it is to Ukraine. News Sky points out that the scale and scope of the joint exercises held between Russia and Belarus have been increasing over the last few years. Russia has been modernizing infrastructure and sending ammo to bases in the Osipovichi region of Belarus for a while now. That all made sense a year or two ago. Most Belarusian military exercises took place in the center of the country, which is where the base was located. But now something has changed. Military exercises in Belarus are now more often taking place in the northwest, which is far closer to the borders of 2 NATO nations that can't possibly be comfortable for the Collective Defense Alliance. Those 2 nations are Poland and Lithuania. And they'll be watching what Russia and Belarus are doing during their joint nuclear drills with a massive level of suspicion. Increased NATO surveillance is already in place across the borders of those 2 countries, as well as in Latvia, and Lithuania has put some of its forces on high alert. Clearly, NATO is worried. Officials from both NATO and the European Union have already blasted Putin for his decision to station nukes in Belarus. That condemnation was already coming in thick and fast in 2023 when the European Union's chief diplomat, Josep Borrell, dubbed what Russia is doing as an irresponsible escalation and threat to European security. Similar concerns have been raised as the joint drills continue, but Belarus has been dismissive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has already pointed to what's happening in Belarus as a major threat. Putin's mouthpiece, Dmitry Peskov, responded by claiming that such statements were just attempts to inflame tensions. Right, because Russia and Belarus holding tactical nuclear weapons drills that threaten Ukraine and NATO is a de-escalation tactic. All of this brings us back to the man at the center of all of this, not Putin, the lapdog Lukashenko. According to News Sky, Lukashenko is all in on the nuclear exercises that are happening on his territory right now. More are planned for June, the outlet says, and it seems likely that those exercises will be scaled up to include more aircraft and involve mock launches. Belarus continues to talk about how all of these exercises are defensive in nature, but it's hard to take such claims seriously. Belarus isn't being attacked, and Belarus is on the side of the aggressor in the Ukraine war. What Lukashenko means is that Putin has told him that all of this is necessary, and that's what makes Belarus's dictator so dangerous. Whatever semblance of a spine that he might have had seems to have disappeared, and all that's left is an insane desire to maintain a grasp on power that is slipping more and more into Putin's hands. There are some who believe that Lukashenko will do everything that he can to avoid war. Political strategist Taras Zaharodny tells RBC Ukraine, "Lukashenko is a bandit and a dictator, but not an idiot," as he says that Lukashenko fully understands that starting any sort of war, nuclear or otherwise, with Ukraine would ruin his country's economy and erode his grip on power. Zaharodny suggests that what we're seeing from Lukashenko right now is the imitation of war preparations. That may be the case, but the creep of Russian influence into Belarus is real. Bit by bit, Putin has succeeded in getting Lukashenko to do whatever he asks. We saw that during the initial invasion of Ukraine. We saw it again when Russia dressed up its nuclear deal as being beneficial to Belarus, when the reality was that it made Belarus a target while allowing Russia to project more power. And we're seeing it once more in the joint nuclear drills. These drills aren't happening because Lukashenko wants them to happen. Putin is pissed off about what Ukraine achieved in Moscow, and he's using Belarus to send a message. That's why Lukashenko is so dangerous to Ukraine right now. His power, at least when it comes to matters of geopolitics or wars, is non-existent. Putin makes the decisions. Lukashenko just does what he's told. And the insane thing about all of this is that Lukashenko knows that the joint drills happening now are designed to ensure that Belarus will be a suitable staging ground for a nuclear weapons launch if and when Putin decides that one is needed. But he's letting the drills happen anyway. One more piece of Belarus has been handed to Putin, and all that Lukashenko can do is pretend that this is all his idea. Lukashenko is a puppet, but he is a worrying one. And it's not just due to the nuclear drills happening on his territory right now. Worrying rhetoric has been coming out of Belarus, suggesting that the country is gearing up for war. From Kyiv to the Suwalki Gap, the danger is escalating fast. There are now 3 dangerous scenarios that could reshape the Ukraine war, and you can find out about all of them in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you can keep up with our coverage of the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you as always for watching.